We are at Cranfield School of Management in the Management Research Institute with Dr. Richard Wilding, who is Professor of Supply Chain Risk Management. Now, Richard is one of the leading supply chain management specialists in Europe today, and together we're going to be talking about supply chain strategy. So, Richard, we hear a lot about strategy, but what is actually important about supply chain strategy?
Well, if we think about strategy, there are a number of levels to it. All businesses have a high-level corporate strategy, and that's where the old joke of the standard mission statement comes in. Below that, you have a competitive strategy for each market you're operating in. Now, what's important about the competitive strategy is this is generally something which is very much developed by the marketing people. So the competitive strategy for, say, operating in Europe will maybe be very different from operating in Africa. Now, below that, we then have supply chain strategy. And the key thing with the supply chain strategy is it has to be developed jointly with the marketing function and the marketing people within the organisation. Because really the supply chain is going to be used to actually add value within that environment. So it's very important that we understand from the marketing people what drives value. And if we understand and have clarity in what drives value for the marketing people, then it's very easy for us to start putting together the supply chain strategy.
So what do organisations need to consider when developing a supply chain strategy?
Okay, the supply chain strategy, there are 4 key elements that it's made up of. First of all, we have to think of the area of process design. So we have to think of our supply chain process design. The second key area is we have to think about basically the supply chain network design. This is where we're going to locate all our facilities and, manufacturing operations, where we're going to have warehouses and depots and so on and so forth. After that, we also need to very much consider the whole area of the information systems which are used to communicate across the supply chain. And then finally, we have to think about the organisational structure as well, because the organisational structure is key to, if you like, developing a particular supply chain, making sure we've got the right people in the right place. Now, if you remember, the competitive strategy will be different for different markets. So the processes we use, the networks we use, the information systems we use, and even the organisation may be different for different markets because we have to understand, well, what are the key value drivers, the things that customers are really buying. In Europe, it may be that people want a very responsive supply chain. And the whole focus, for example, is around responsiveness and availability. Whereas if we go to Africa, it may be around affordability. In other words, how can we manufacture this product and distribute this product as cheaply as possible so that as many people can actually afford to buy this product at a particular time? Now, when you think about the supply chain structures involved, it will have completely different implications. I've got a good example, actually. I was working in the beer industry some months ago, and they were doing precisely this. So if you're looking at a beer in, say, the Netherlands, it's all about availability. So you have very responsive processes. You need to be able to have beer distributed within 2 hours and so on and so forth. But when you actually move out to somewhere like Africa, very different. It's all about this whole issue of affordability. There you say, well, what's the network like? What are the processes? And they say, well, very streamlined processes. The network, well, people come to our facility and they pick up beer. And I said, oh, so, do you have 15-minute delivery windows for these people? Oh, no, they sit in their pickup trucks for up to 5 days before we allocate them the beer. Now, you're not going to get away with that in Europe, but in Africa, that is appropriate. So we need to understand that for different environments, you're going to have different approaches.
Okay, so what is the one thing that is critical to an effective supply chain strategy?
The critical thing that we need to consider is how we get both marketing and the supply chain operations people working together. Marketing can't do their thing on their own. They need the supply chain's support and their expertise. Because now what we're finding is that really the product, particularly if we're looking at a particular product, that is just a qualifier. What makes the difference now is how we deliver that product, how we make that product available. And really by working closely with the supply chain people, marketing can understand how value is created through supply chain, but also supply chain can understand what really creates value for the customer. And if we can get both marketing and the supply chain aligned, So that really generates the value. And in fact, marketing and supply chain, they need to work together even before product launch. When you're designing a product offering and so on and so forth, those things need to really come together so that you can start using the supply chain to really leverage competitive advantage.
Okay, Richard, thanks for spending the time with us today.
You're very welcome.